this looks like a good place.
And what a great day we've had.
Yes, and I'm quite happy to sit down now and give my legs a rest.
We've worked hard to make it to this point. What are bioweapons?
A bioweapon is essentially a virus or a bacteria that is put on some kind of launcher.
So we all could be bioweapons.
In a way, yes, we could.
What is urgent that we do now?
I think it's urgent that we all recognize that we have this treaty. It has been working well, so we need to continue supporting the treaty. And the risks of something going wrong or somebody misusing the amazing biology that's out there are very real.
Biotechnology is emerging really fast. And just a few years ago, we lived through a pandemic that I think brought people's awareness of how vulnerable we are to viruses, to different biosecurity issues, really to a very intimate level. We were so incredibly aware suddenly that our security depends on the healthcare system of other countries, and that the best way of protecting ourselves is to protect everyone. And we have made some really great progress on these issues in the world. The Biological Weapons Convention has banned and eliminated these kind of weapons. Most states in the world have signed this treaty, but yet, of course, there are challenges that remain. We see things like climate change, loss of biodiversity, and of course, emerging technologies really put biosecurity at the forefront again. So I'm really excited here at Summit Talks to have our guest today, Filippa Lentzos. I'm so pleased that you can make it today. You are an associate professor at King's College in London. You're an expert at bioweapons, and you're the NGO coordinator of the Bioweapons Convention. So I'm so happy that you can make it up here to Summit Talks. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. What a great idea.
Yeah, and what a great day we've had.
Indeed.
On the snow.
Yes, and I'm quite happy to sit down now and give my legs a rest.
We've worked hard to make it to this point.
Yes, exactly.
We deserve a little bit of a break now. So first, I want to ask you, what are bioweapons? Can you explain to people really easy, like what is a bioweapon?
Sure. I mean, a bioweapon is essentially some kind of organism that makes you sick. So it's usually it would be a virus or a bacteria that is put on some kind of launcher, right? Some way of disseminating bacteria or virus to get it into people's bodies or into other animals or into crops. So it's just bugs that can make us sick.
So it can be man-made or it can be natural and just occurring in nature.
Well, the viruses can be man, but they're not. I mean, when you get sick at home, usually
that's not a bioweapon.
That's not a bioweapon. So there's got to be this intent to cause harm.
Like a super stupid question, maybe, but is like intentionally walking around people when you're sick considered a bioweapon if you do it intentionally?
With the intent of making other people sick, yeah. And then you would be kind of the vector to transport or transmit the virus, right? Or the bacteria.
So we all could be bioweapons.
If we are aiming, in a way, yes, we could. Yeah. And I mean, originally bioweapons were kind of thought of in different ways. So because it's very difficult in your head to think of, well, what is a bio? What does it look like? Yeah.
It's very invisible.
It's very invisible. Well, certainly the effects are often, or the way it transmits from person to person can be very invisible, as we know, living through COVID, etc. But it can be put into many different kinds of dissemination systems, right? So it could be put on a bomb. It could be part of a cluster bomb. It could be on a missile, the typical hardware that you think of when you think of weapon. Yeah. But it could also be put into insects that can work as these taxis, ferrying viruses
like from mosquitoes, for example?
Like mosquitoes, like from crop to crop, for instance. Because bioweapons don't just affect humans. They can also affect animals. They can also infect crops or, other plants. And so there are many different kinds of means of disseminating these, including, to some extent, our own bodies, like you were saying.
So do you have some examples of when bioweapons have been used?
Thankfully, not so many, no. No, really not. No, biological weapons were, as you said, completely prohibited through the convention, and that was 50 years ago, last year, in fact, since it entered into force. And since then, there's been absolutely no use of biological weapons in war. Of course, historically, there have been in ancient history, everyone's heard about,
Columbus with the blankets.
The smallpox blankets, as they are called kind of for short, or infecting wells with stuff, with disease, throwing dead bodies into wells to contaminate the drinking water, and that way spread...
As a method of war.
Yes, denying clean drinking water, could be a method of warfare, right? Or catapulting diseased cadavers across city walls as a way of kind of spreading disease inside fortified cities. So in the ancient past, that was a kind of biological warfare. But in the more modern history, that's not how we
So things
consider.
like an anthrax attack, for example, is that a bioweapons use?
So we have had an anthrax attack. I think it's fairly prominent in many people's minds still, especially because it came just after 9/11. So there was this, at the time, certainly there was this sense of, are these two things connected? But they weren't. And it was not biowarfare. We seem to think that it was a single individual who was behind this, mailing very sophisticated type of anthrax that had been developed in U.S. laboratories, in fact.
Ah, okay, I didn't know that. Yeah.
To media outlets and to politicians as a way of trying to get the message across that, look, this is a serious threat we need to take seriously, and you need to keep funding our projects on this.
Yeah.
So that seems to be kind of the story behind the anthrax attacks in 2001.
Yeah. I think that attack triggered people's kind of thought about how these things can happen, like bioterrorism. If you look at, for example, states, are there any states today and any countries that have bioweapons today?
Depends who you ask, I think. But you're asking me.
I'm asking you.
You're asking me. So we have no official sources by which to say that. There are a couple of states that would be on some countries' lists of potentials. But it also depends a little bit on what you mean by, do they have biological weapons? Do you mean, do they have the capacity to develop or to use biology to deliberately cause harm? Yes, and in fact, a lot of states would fall into that category. If you mean, do they have stockpiles of, say, anthrax, ready to load onto missiles and send off? No.
No.
We don't have that. No. I think there are no countries that have that. That's a very Cold War way of thinking about biological weapons. And of course, it is also the way the Biological Weapons Convention originally conceptualized biological weapons as these stockpiles.
Yeah, so tell me a little bit about the Biological Weapons Convention. I know it was negotiated in the 60s, signed, and then entered into force in the 1970s. So it's quite a long time. Before that, you had a ban on use on bioweapons through the Geneva Conventions. In the Geneva Conventions, the laws of war that basically prevents you can't use chemical or biological weapons, but you could still possess them before that. So
that was the 1925 Geneva Protocol, that's right, exactly, which banned the use of, which was kind of the first arms control measure focused specifically on, it was actually chemical weapons that it originally focused on, coming out of World War I and the use of chemical weapons in World War I. And it was more like an afterthought that they said, we should also include bio.
Yeah.
So both chemical and biological weapons were prohibited. The use of these weapons were prohibited. Ironically, that was after signing or coming to this agreement was when several states started developing on a more industrial scale their biological weapons programs.
So then in the 70s, the Biological Weapons Convention came. It's the first treaty that banned and eliminated a weapon of mass destruction. To my mind, like a massive success story for the world. I think we forget sometimes that the whole world came together in quite a difficult time. Like this was the kind of in the middle of the Cold War. It was not great, geopolitical situation. There was a lot of tension, a lot of confrontation between the two blocs. Yet they came together and banned and eliminated a whole category of weapons of mass destruction. Tell me a little bit about the Biological Weapons Convention. What is it? What does it do?
Well, the Biological Weapons Convention prohibits the development and stockpiling of biological weapons. The Geneva Protocol already prohibits the use, and the Biological Weapons Convention also does that kind of intuitively and by later agreements. But it is this complete blanket ban that everyone signs up to. So in that sense, it's quite a triumph to have got there already. But there were challenges, because what's different about that bugs, viruses and bacteria is that they're all around. They're all around us, right? And so you've got to figure out what kind of use of these weapons or these bugs is prohibited. And so it came down to this general purpose criterion, which basically just means it's about the intent with which you work with these. Because scientists work with bacteria and viruses all the time, including the dangerous ones, in order for us to learn more about them, to learn more about how disease spreads and how we can stop it. And so that sort of work still needs to be able to go on. It's when you have misuse in mind or the intention to cause harm that you cross the line into what is the priority of the area for the Biological Weapons Convention. And the convention picked up more and more states along the way, and we are now almost universal. So there's just a few holdouts that haven't signed yet. But incredibly enough, almost all states in the world have signed up to it. And since it entered into force 50 years ago in 1975, there's been no use of these weapons. So in that sense, the convention is an incredible success story. There is one part of it that everyone brings up, which is, but you can't verify. Which is why, to some extent, it's difficult to answer the question you said to me, which is, well, how many states does anyone have them, or how many? And the reason they did this was they realized it's incredibly difficult, because they're everywhere. They're being used everywhere, even in not just in scientific labs, but also in beer breweries and, pharmaceutical companies everywhere. How do you differentiate that? And how can you see when you're using the same equipment, you're using the same material more or less, how can you check that it's not being used for harm? This was recognized very early on in the diplomatic discussions around the BWC, and they said, you know what, this is too difficult for us to tackle right now. But we see a window of opportunity in which we can all agree on the treaty as is without that verification bit. And so they put that aside and were then able to close the deal, to be able to sign the treaty. But that doesn't mean that verification question has gone away.
No, it's been a long-standing debate, discussion. A lot of work has been going in to see if can we add something like that to the treaty.
Absolutely, absolutely. And they continue through today. Yeah.
And I think it's one of the things that is the most fascinating on this issue to me is the sort of the blurred lines between what a weapon is, what a natural disease is, for example, but also in terms of how you protect yourself against it. I mean, just like with vaccines, you have to have the strain of the virus in order to develop a vaccine. So in order to protect yourself against a bioweapon and develop the antidotes or the protection, you have to develop the weapon or the harmful strain, which then, of course, so if you're going to defend yourself against this, both natural and man-made, you have to also have some kind of original strain to relate to, which of course can feed suspicion that you're actually developing the weapon itself.
Exactly right.
So you kind of have to develop the weapon in order to develop the protection against it.
That is certainly the argument of some.
Of some. And how would you argue?
How you would argue if you have a big biodefense program working on this. So there is this gray line between biodefense, things that are clearly for defensive purposes, like putting up surveillance for any disease outbreaks or developing protective equipment, for example. And then going into other kinds of defense where this boundary shifts a little bit. And to some on the outside, it might not seem as though what you're doing is clearly defensive. It might cross into that, this could be more offensive kind of stuff. And that gray zone hasn't been fixed over time. So what we've seen happen since the treaty was agreed is that boundary has shifted quite a bit towards the offensive side. So it's becoming more and more accepted to do more and more offensive-like research in your biodefense programs. And so 20 years ago, what's currently being done today in the name of biodefense would likely 20 years ago have been considered offensive.
And does that worry you? I mean, I'm just thinking that also we're in a moment where governments don't trust each other, an increasingly threatful situation. Does that shift, is that a concern for you?
Absolutely, 100%. We're already in an environment of limited trust, limited confidence. This kind of ambiguity increases that distrust, right? At a time when we really do need to trust each other more, or at least build more confidence in each other's activities. Yeah.
And it's one of those frustrating things about working in this field is that, you know, we have this problem and we walk around and saying that, oh, we need a treaty to fix these problems, and we need a treaty to ban and eliminate this. And then you get it, and it's a little bit like a whack-a-mole kind of situation. Like new things pop up, right? Like because things change, the world change, implementation. Like you're never really done with this work. So even if you have a huge success, the work kind of continues. So aside from this, that the kind of defensive research, that gray zone is shifting, what are the big problems around biosecurity today? Like, what are you most concerned about?
Right. So we have more hybrid war.
Yeah.
And the concern is that biological weapons are going to become more useful in this kind of theater of war, rather than the kinds of theaters of war, the hot wars that we've seen, or as deterrents, as they were strategic deterrents, as they were thought of during the Cold War. Now the real concern is the technology's changed so much. Possibilities for delivering the delivery systems of viruses and bacteria have changed so much that there are many more ways of getting bugs into people's bodies, essentially, that there might be a kind of a military or some other more use for these weapons. So that, I think, is of real concern.
Yeah.
And a lot of the emerging technologies that we're seeing, and here I'm thinking of, you know, gene synthesis and AI and robotics and all of this, cloud labs, are increasing the ambiguity around this dual-use issue. So you have less oversight, but they're also opening up new possibilities for harm. And I think it's also important to then highlight, well, there might also be opportunities that are opened up by these new technologies too.
So, because that's something that I've heard a lot in the last few years, that sort of AI, you know, can produce these kind of strains, or what do you call it?
A DNA sequence?
Like sequences and stuff like that. And then you can kind of, something that used to cost like millions of dollars and require a long time in laboratory with very high level scientists can now be done with a computer and an internet connection. Is that true?
Well, it is something you hear. It's something you hear a lot, and especially now in terms of the AI debates, coupling AI together with synthetic biology. So anyone can kind of now design, figure out, use AI to figure out, well, what are the most harmful genes, then design some kind of awful virus with that gene in it, send it off to a gene synthesis company, which will send you back the virus that you've created on your computer. You've then got a weapon that you can unleash on the world, and millions of people will die. You know, that's kind of, in a very simplistic way, the image that's painted for us.
That sounds extremely scary.
It sounds very scary.
Yeah.
But it's not that easy.
No. Okay, good. I have enough things to worry about. No. Tell me, why is it not that easy?
Well, one of the reasons it's not that easy is just because in the end you have a virus or bacteria doesn't mean you have a weapon, right?
Okay.
First of all, you need to find a way of disseminating that weapon, that virus. But even before you do that, you've got to figure out how to not infect yourself, first of all. And lots of people are not comfortable in a lab. I'm sure you and I would probably not know what to do.
No.
So you've got to scale it up, get more of it. You've got to make sure it's stable. You've got to then disseminate it. You've got to make sure it only disseminates to the target that you want to be, that you want to target. But even that's not enough. You might get to a point where you've disseminated it into people's bodies, but people's bodies have immune systems, so they might fight back, and they might they might not very well have the effect that you want. So they're, as weapons, and traditionally I think this is why it was easier to get agreement for the treaty is because they were such uncertain weapons.
Yeah, not really effective or not really...
They could be effective.
Yeah.
But it wasn't sure that they would be. Sometimes bacteria, as you will know, are affected by sunlight, for example. Many bacteria die when...
So this is good.
Yeah, exactly. This is good.
Cold and sunlight.
Cold is good.
Yeah.
Sunlight is good. Fresh air.
Yeah.
So we can keep our 1 meter distance. We remember that all too well. Yeah, exactly. Those things, wind, rain, all these things affect living organisms. And so there's so much ambiguity around biological weapons.
So it's not so easy to...
So militarily they're not so useful, and it's not easy to source them, produce them, scale it up, and spread them with the intended effect.
Yeah.
And then once let's say you get to the end state where you have infected somebody, it's not sure they will develop the disease, and it takes a while, For terrorists particularly, which are often the ones that are paired with biological weapons. Now, terrorists can do anything once they have a sequencer and, access to some material. There is no bang.
Yeah.
You get to... And often that's what you're after. You want the bang so that people know that it's happened.
Yeah.
Here you're kind of stuck for maybe a couple of weeks and you don't know. Have people even twigged that there's been an attack?
Yeah. If nobody knows there's been a terrorist attack, it's not a very good terrorist attack. I mean,
it depends a little bit on your purpose, right?
Yeah.
But if your purpose is to draw attention to your cause, then it's a fizzle rather than a bang, and a complicated and an unsure one. So yes, I mean, historically, terrorists have not gone anywhere near biological weapons. No.
I mean, one thing that I found your comment earlier, I wanted to just ask you a little bit more in depth on that. You said that one of the biggest challenges, or one of the things that concern you now, is sort of the lack of trust, which we see in all fields. Why is that? Can you describe how that is a problem specifically on biosecurity? And I'm thinking about it broader than just weapons, right? Because we're seeing during the pandemic, we saw a lot of misinformation, a lot of manipulation of different scientists' opinions, a lot of fear about a vaccine, for example, that's been developed very fast in response to this. And now we see also even in the United States, which is the example of everything right now, a Secretary of Health that is taking some questionable decisions and sharing information about things. I mean, why particularly is sort of lack of trust, disinformation such a problem for biosecurity?
Because a lot is happening in biology right now. So there's a lot of money pouring into biology because there's so much potential. So we're building capacities all over the world. So there's money pouring in for developing all kinds of cool science, for developing medicines, but there's also money pouring into biodefense. And so capacities are increasing all over the world. And without an understanding of what the intent is behind those increased capacities, it becomes very easy to get the wrong idea.
Yeah.
And when you, in addition, have this information environment, which is confusing you through misinformation or through active disinformation campaigns, and we've seen a fair bit of active disinformation in the biodomain, it really reduces, I think, confidence that the capacities are all being developed for good, sound reasons.
Yeah. And did you feel like, I mean, to me, sort of the pandemic was such a wake-up call, and it was quite interesting because I've heard a lot of experts in this, because I've never worked on bioweapons or global health issues, but I've sort of been on the fringes of this, so I've heard it. And I've heard so many scientists and experts talk about, pandemic is going to come, a pandemic comes, and we're warning about this, and you're like, yeah, whatever. And then it comes, and politicians and leaders like, who would have known? And all the experts like, we knew that it would come.
Yeah.
But have you felt that the pandemic has, really did it teach us any lessons? Did we learn from it? How are there things that we're doing better now because of it? Like, did we actually learn something from it?
I mean, I wish the answer could be an emphatic yes, absolutely.
But everything, a bit of this, a bit of that.
A bit of this, a bit of that. You know, we've had disease, we've had epidemics before, we've had pandemics before.
Yeah.
It wasn't so long ago, you'll remember the Ebola outbreak that that was badly affecting Western Africa, but that also we were very concerned about where we are, you know. And so, yes, we learn lessons, but we don't, I think, learn enough lessons, and we don't sustain attention or funding streams on this. So many of the really great initiatives that were put in place during the coronavirus pandemic, like wastewater surveillance, for instance, all of that's been disassembled.
Really?
Again, a lot of it has because, well,
we don't need it anymore.
Well, it costs money. It's obviously better if we do have it, because then you can get a much better baseline of what is normal in terms of the microbiomes that we all have and what's in people's body. It's one of those indicators, right, of what could be in people's bodies.
So how much do the sort of weapons versus just regular WHO, the World Health Organization kind of work? There's, for example, been a new pandemic treaty negotiated at the World Health Organization that is supposed to be a treaty that is going to kind of allow us to deal with the pandemic even and next pandemic better. Are there sort of synergies between these two sectors? Like there's viruses in both cases, there's diseases, there's the same way of protecting each other. Like, is there synergy in this field?
I think there is some synergy now. Of course, at this moment in time, the WHO is really struggling, just like the UN is struggling, from funding, lack of funding, a lot of programs folding, people losing their jobs. But historically, the public health sector and the security sector tried to distance each other from each other because it made it more difficult to do public health work. If you're going into a country trying with vaccination campaigns, with educational campaigns and so on, and there was a sense that perhaps they're doing this with ulterior motives, if there's any kind of security element in this, it would make it much more difficult. So the idea of, for example, with Osama bin Laden, disguising that as a polio vaccination campaign kills public health, right? I mean, it is awful. Not very,
Can you tell me about that?
Long-sighted.
Can you just tell that story?
Yeah, it was a way of finding out where he was hiding and to get him out of his hiding place, right?
So they orchestrated a polio vaccination campaign. Yeah,
essentially.
And who did that?
It was a fake. I think it was the United States.
Yeah.
Who's now sadly pulled out of the WHO completely, all its programs, all its experts, and so on. But historically there has been this recognition that security and public health are best kept apart. More recently, there is a recognition that, for example, if there is a biological weapons attack, first people on the ground are going to be probably public health people, right? In the country, it's going to be the front line are doctors and nurses and those working emergency services. And so working together makes a lot of sense. Also, there is a need to protect the health service. So if they're the ones going into a disease outbreak communities, you need to try to make sure you protect them from the security situation. And so it makes a lot of sense for the public health community to work more in tandem with the security community. And we are seeing that now, that slightly closer relationship. Also, the sorts of threats that we're looking at today are more elaborate, I think more complex than they were previously. So the way in which we envision biological weapons today isn't simply just pathogens that make you sick. There are many ways of harming you using biology today, most of which can still be covered by the convention, but some of which aren't. They're a completely different kind of kettle of fish. You could use your biology, and we do that already to some extent through, surveillance of facial recognition, for instance, fingerprinting, iris scanning. This is all your private biology, right? On your outside. But it's becoming easier and easier, and there's with AI, all these databases are coming together, enabling you to figure out on a genetic level, the most intimate personal level of you, your individual, where you can track individuals or groups of people. That would be a new kind of threat that's not necessarily covered by the Biological Weapons Convention, but it's very much one in which biology can be used to do harm, whether through suppression or surveillance or,
So, which leads me perfectly into sort of my next question. What do we need to do to solve this next kind of phase of problem on the biosecurity issues? What are you working on? What's governments working on? What are scientists and healthcare professionals working on? What is urgent that we do now?
Well, I think it's urgent that we all recognize that we have this treaty. It has been agreed. It has been working well. So we need to continue supporting the treaty. I don't think we should open it up and say, okay, there are now new biological threats. We need to try to incorporate those into this. That is a separate treaty. But we do need to think of what are the other threats that biology can bring to us as individuals, communities, society at large. And here I think there's scope for developing additional understandings as a multilateral community, and that is incredibly hard at this moment in time.
And how would developing additional understanding, this kind of terms that you and I use, what does that mean for a person who doesn't follow these things? Like
that countries get onto the same page. Yeah, it can be like an agreement. It could be a treaty, but treaties are hard to get to, right?
Oh, especially today.
And especially today.
Difficult.
Yes.
But it can also be other types of work.
Yeah.
This kind of, now I use the same
it could be like, it's like standard setting. Right?
Setting new standards.
Setting new standards and saying, well, this is where we draw the line. We don't think this is acceptable, this is not acceptable. You know, the Biological Weapons Convention is completely focused on the material. So the equipment, so the things you see in a laboratory, and the material, which are the viruses and the bacteria. And that's also what our export control regimes are focused on. So there are limits on what you can export to certain countries when it comes to these things, because there is a concern that they would then put them together and make biological weapons. Today, so much of this has gone digital. It's on information on computers that we're worried about. It is stuff that's being built on or designed on one computer, developed or in another country, and then used in a third, you know? So the territorial boundary of these treaties that target actual things in one country, for example, doesn't work. So, or it's not that it doesn't work. That's part of the problem, but the problem has expanded. So we need to more broadly think about how can we maybe supplement the treaty, looking at those things, and maybe there are other things that we need in the biological field where we might need to develop negotiate new agreements, set new standards, develop new codes of practice or codes of conduct, new agreements between companies, develop new networks of people who can start developing, of experts that can start developing trust between themselves.
Scientists, for example.
Like scientists, for example.
Or companies. I mean, I also think what's very different from the 1970s is, of course, that the private sector is, I mean, there's some companies that are more powerful and influential over the world than governments are almost.
There are some individuals, super-powered individuals, who are more powerful than countries. They have more means at their disposal than countries. So it's a very different world we live in now.
So we have to figure out how to use this.
Yeah.
What would you like people to do about this issue? Should people be worried? Should they take action? How can we collectively, on an individual basis, but also sort of through communities, start building better trusts around these kind of public health issues, but also biosafety issues? What can you do?
Well, I think one of the things that's important is to start education early. So in science class in school, let's talk about the possibility of misuse, you know? And not to try to give people ideas, of course, but to say, you know, this is something that has happened. Scientists who we adore and admire for their expertise are also humans who make mistakes, who make bad decisions, who have egos, who don't necessarily always want the best for everyone. And we've got historical examples of that. just like we have in biology and biological weapons, there have been biological weapons programs. There have been people who actively try to develop biology in such a way that will deliberately harm you. So there is, I think, an awareness raising campaign that needs to be done, an educational campaign that needs to be done with the people who are in laboratories, interested in the science, that should be as a matter of course. And then there are standards that need to be set for industry, raise the awareness in industry about these things. And also with doctors, the first line of defense, should there be an outbreak, so that people are prepared for not panicking, but thinking, okay, but there are things we can do, like coronavirus pandemic, right? The best thing you could do, wash your hands.
Yeah.
Like, there's some things that are really simple. Wash your hands a lot. Keep a distance. Don't cough on each other, you know? There are some things that we can do also. So we need to also, I think through knowledge, we can empower ourselves. Yeah. And that's one of the things that, for me, makes my job as a lecturer or a teacher so fulfilling, because you can pass that on to a new generation, and you see lights go on, you see them getting inspired, and you see them kind of, interested in making the world a better place, to put it in a kind of very simple way. But they do that by understanding what's gone before, where it's come from, and that there is some agency there. There is stuff we can do about it.
It's nice because these issues are always really overwhelming and it feels very far away. But I think I like of course, governments have a lot of work to do, but you outline sort of teachers and students and people working for biotech companies and scientists and nurses and doctors. We're already in quite a big list of people that will play a really essential role on this issue in the future.
We're all in this together.
Yeah.
Hey, viruses and bacteria are all around us.
Yeah, and wash your hands. Very important.
Final word, wash your hands. That's
Final word. Do you think that we can get through this phase, right, and build a better future? Like, how would that look like to you, especially when it comes to the issue that you work on?
I do have faith. I do work with students a lot. And I do think that generation that's coming through, it's often a hopeful generation. It's a generation that, as we did too, you know, we had more energy, more aspiration, more ambition, more drive to make the world a better place. I think as we grow, we get sometimes a bit more cynical. We've been disappointed a lot of times, but we've also had some highs, right, which are able to sustain us. I think we have to remain optimistic because there isn't an alternative. We're not going to just roll over, right? But it's tough right now. And I think it's also okay to recognize that. Yeah. But to find the opportunities in that for new ways of working, new ways of developing relationship, new ways of figuring out how trust works or confidence building works between people, between experts, between communities, between countries. And I remain hopeful.
And just from my side, actually, the Bioweapons Convention has always been an inspiration, actually, for the work we did on nuclear weapons. Like, we ban biological weapons, we ban chemical weapons, so of course we can ban nuclear weapons as well. And I think that I can find hope in the old achievements, because it wasn't that easy then. We take those things for granted now, but that was a lot of hard work, a lot of really great people who worked for a long time to make those happen, and we're safer today because of it. So I find inspiration in your work too. So thank you so much, Filippa, for joining me today on the mountains, on ski slope. One of the best work days I've had, I think, ever.
Average Friday.
Average Friday in Switzerland. Don't say that on camera.
Okay,
Pretend like we work really hard. But thank you so much for joining Summit Talks.
Thank you for having me.